praise the Lord, and pass the ammunition. It's time for the GunGuyTV podcast.
Hi, this is Joel Persinger. I'm the Gun Guy. Thank you very much for listening to my podcast and supporting GunGuyTV the way you do. I am extremely grateful. Now listen, I have a kind of a hoarse voice today. I've been talking with customers all day. I've been had a really long week, very good week, but a long week, about a week and a half, where I've been doing about 4 hours sleep a day, I think. It's been extremely busy at work. But, you know, that's a great problem to have. I don't complain about that. I could be out of work, and I've certainly experienced that in my life. So when we're extremely busy, I think that's awesome. However, it has caused me to be a little bit late on this podcast. It's now the 7th, and it was really supposed to be published on the 5th. So I apologize for that. It will be out today, and I'll try to get them on time. I've been trying to actually get ahead on podcasts, but there's been so much going on that in order to keep them topical, I've had to do them as I'm going to release them and not stack up 5 or 6 in advance and then rotate them out a little bit at a time. I'd love to be able to do that, but there's been a lot going on. Well, in any case, the podcast, as usual, is 1 hour long. The first half an hour is free, and it's available on your favorite podcast player. The second half an hour is available on Patreon only. And we're going to deal with 2 different subjects today. One is the fact that Trump is being attacked by an anonymous whistleblower, and now it sounds like more than one anonymous whistleblower. And how does that, golly, that looks just like a red flag law to me. So we're going to talk about that. And an article that appeared in AmmoLand really talks about that, and I thought that was a very interesting take on it. So I'm going to share some of that with you, and then share my own thoughts with you, and I'd love to know yours. And then in the second half of the podcast, we're going to deal with a subject matter that I don't see very much. Whenever I'm looking at survival and that kind of stuff, I ever want to look at preppers and so on, it seems to focus heavily on folks that either have a place outside of the city in a rural area, or folks that have the ability to leave the city suddenly and end up in that rural spot. But here's the question. You live in the city and everything goes to pot all at once. What now? Well, I'm going to talk about that. What can you do if you're in the city? And I'm going to share with you my views and what I do, because I don't live in the heart of the city. I don't live in San Diego, for example. I live in the outskirts of San Diego in a neighboring city that's much smaller, but I still live kind of in the suburbs. I live in the burbs. I don't live in the country. The chances of my getting out are slimmer than folks who are already out. And if you lived in the city down in San Diego, you live downtown, for example, in one of the apartments downtown or close to the beach, you're not getting out. And if you do, it's going to be very hard. So we'll talk about that in the second part of the podcast. That will be available on Patreon. So check it out there. All right. Now, as far as the president is concerned, I've made a lot of notes here because I just find this whole thing kind of interesting. There's an article that appeared in AmmoLand, which had some great stuff in it from Alan Gottlieb. Alan Gottlieb, in case you don't know, is the executive vice president of SAF, which is the Second Amendment Foundation. I believe he was also founder of that organization. He is an incredibly intelligent man, and I've really enjoyed chatting with him on the few occasions I've had the opportunity to do so. Now, if you run into him and ask him and say, hey, I know you talked to the gun guy, he's going to say, who? Because he probably wouldn't remember me from Adam. But I did have an opportunity to interview him once at SHOT Show a few years back, and I found him to be incredibly knowledgeable and very bright. In looking at what's happening with the president right now, and, it's somebody and I were talking about this the other day. If you don't know what's going on with the president right now, or you think you know, wait 5 minutes, it seems to change. Something new has happened. It's a very short news cycle right now. It's enough to drive anybody crazy, because about every 5 or 10 minutes, it seems like there's a new accuser or something new happening. I have likened this to the president fighting a hydra, because every time he lops off a head, the thing grows 2 more. I would remind you of what I have to remind myself, and that is I voted for Donald Trump to do several things. I wanted him to protect the Second Amendment, which he's done an okay job of, but not a great job of. One of the things that I have problems with him about is the bump stock, although I wonder sometimes if he didn't act with an executive order to ban the bump stock, knowing that that executive order was not going to stand up against scrutiny by the court, in order to avoid or rather than having the Congress actually pass a law, which they didn't do. So undoing an executive order is actually a lot easier. I don't know. Maybe I'm giving him way too much credit. That could be true, too. But I also voted for him to get us out of these needless wars that we've been going on forever, which he's working on, to secure the border. There's a whole lot of things I voted for the president to do, and it seems like in each and every case, as he's attempted to do these things, the swamp, which I voted for him to drain, because he talked about draining the swamp, wants to fight back. So the swamp creature is sort of like a hydra. It keeps coming up with more heads. Every time he cuts one off, there's another one. As I started viewing it that way, I started realizing what was happening. And less do I have an issue with President Trump, and more do I support him, because I can envision him as being Odysseus with the sword, lopping off the heads of the hydra and fiercely fighting, to some degree, all on his own. So I urge you to support him if you supported him in the beginning, and really give some thought to it before you abandon him. But that's a whole different conversation, I suppose. In any case, Alan Gottlieb pointed out some great things in this article I'm going to share with you. Here's some quotes. He said, and this is a quote, "The anonymous whistleblower complaint against President Donald Trump now being used by Democrats to launch an impeachment inquiry is tantamount to a red flag action against a gun owner, with the accused being presumed guilty until he or she can prove their innocence," which is exactly the opposite of the way our system is supposed to work. He goes on to say, "The lynch mob mentality now being exhibited by Capitol Hill Democrats is the same kind of rush to judgment thinking that the courts and prosecutors use to rationalize seizing someone's firearms while throwing due process under the nearest bus." Now, one of the things I do find somewhat, what do they call it, poetic justice, is I'm hearing in my mind President Donald Trump saying, well, I like taking the guns first and then doing due process later. I wonder how much he likes that now, considering they're wanting to impeach him now and worry about due process later. There actually is, believe it or not, a due process for impeachment. The House has to vote, and if they don't get enough votes, they can't actually produce articles of impeachment. And then once they have a vote, then they have an investigation, and if they produce articles of impeachment, those go to the Senate. The Senate tries the case and decides whether to convict the president or not on the merit. And it's called high crimes and misdemeanors. So he's got to be convicted of committing specific crimes in order to be impeached. That's a process that they're not going down. They're throwing the due process out the window and just doing what they want to for political purposes. And that is essentially what happens with red flag laws, which is what makes them, in my mind, so anti-American and so anti-constitutional. Now, Alan Gottlieb goes on to say, far-left House Democrats who have wanted to remove the duly elected president from office since the 2016 election are treating this anonymous complaint like gospel, virtually the same way the legal system treats a so-called red flag complaint against a gun owner. But at least the president in this case has the advantage of knowing there's a complaint filed. But in the case of a red flag allegation, the gun owner typically does not know a thing until police come knocking on the door. In either case, neither the president nor the affected gun owner has had the opportunity to face their accuser. Now, many people, Alan went on to say, are convinced that the president's case amounts to political theatrics. However, there are no theatrics involved when a private citizen's property is seized. As we saw last year in Maryland, a gun owner was served and something went wrong, and that person was shot dead inside his front door. Now, the case he's talking about is the case of Gary Willis, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. One way you can support GunGuyTV is to engage our supporters and the companies that sponsor us, one of which is Second Call Defense. Now, Second Call Defense provides coverage for people who carry guns for defensive purposes or have guns home for defensive purposes. And if you ever happen to use the gun, unfortunately, to have to defend yourself, then they will defend you legally. They'll defend you against criminal charges, and they'll also defend you against lawsuits. And they make that attorney available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they front the money for your defense, so you don't have to sell your house or whatever you have or cash in your retirement plan in order to pay for it, hoping to be reimbursed later. That's the company I use for my family and I to defend us if we ever have to defend ourselves with a firearm. And it's the company I suggest you check out. So if you do check out Second Call Defense, you think you'd like to use them, I would really appreciate it if you would hire them through our link, because we have an affiliate link with them. That way it benefits GunGuy TV a little bit every time you pay your bill. It doesn't cost you a dime. If you like their service and you decide to sign up for it, it's the same cost to you, but it does benefit us. We receive a little marketing fee. So please check out Second Call Defense using our link. You can go to the GunGuy TV website to do that. That's at GunGuy.tv. Or if you like, you can go to GunGuyTV.com or GunGuyTV.net. It's all the same, and it will get you to exactly the same spot.
You're listening to the GunGuy TV podcast. Please pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Now, I said that I would tell you about Gary Willis. Well, Gary Willis was a gun owner in Maryland, and just shortly after the law was passed in Maryland, I think it was a month or so after it was passed, tragedy struck as the police arrived at the door of Mr. Willis just before dawn. Now, they showed up before the sun came up to serve this, what they call in Maryland, an extreme risk protection order, and seize this man's guns. The guy, I think, was 60 years old. Anyway, according to police, Gary Willis opened the door with a pistol in his hand. That's not surprising. You're banging on the man's door before sunup. I think I'd probably show up to the door with a gun, too. In any case, he initially showed up with a gun. He put the gun down, but he picked it back up after the law enforcement folks told him what they were there for. He was arguing with them. He ended up in a heated exchange with them, and according to the county police spokeswoman, a Sergeant Jacqueline Davis, a second police officer at the home shot Willis and killed him. He was in Ferndale, actually. None of the officers trying to serve the warrant were hurt. What's interesting about this is that you can't get any information as to exactly what was in the order. Michelle Willis is the niece of Gary Willis, and as of an article I read from November of 2018, she had described her uncle as a person that likes to speak his mind, but was harmless. I mean, he was opinionated, and he'd tell you what he thought, but according to her, he was harmless. She stated that her uncle wasn't a danger to anyone and questioned why the police shot him. Now, this happens a lot. I have to give the police some due here. It does happen quite frequently where the police end up shooting an individual who is violent, and of course the family comes and says he isn't. So I don't know whether Gary Willis was a violent man or not. I have no idea whether he was a threat to officers or not. I couldn't tell you. I wasn't there. I haven't seen video of it. I don't know. But this is what his niece has said, that he wasn't harmful. He was a harmless guy in his 60s, and he just was very opinionated and felt very strongly about the Second Amendment. Gun Owners of America has been a vocal critic of this whole process, the red flag laws in general, but also what happened here. In fact, Eric Pratt, who is the executive director of Gun Owners of America, said, and this is a quote from him, "We don't know yet all of the facts in this case, so we will be watching the story very closely. But in general, GOA opposes red flag laws because they throw out due process. That is, they order the confiscation of firearms without a conviction of wrongdoing for any crime." Well, Pratt is not alone in not knowing all the facts in the case. In fact, the Maryland judiciary has denied all requests to see any protection orders that deal with Willis. At least as far as I know, I could not find where they've released any. All I could find was denials. Willis's niece, again, Michelle Willis is her name, said her aunt, I guess, took out the order on Willis, but didn't intend it to go this far by any stretch of the imagination. Police are also being tight-lipped about the cause for the order to be taken out on Willis due to the legality surrounding these laws. Apparently, all information in an extreme risk protection order is automatically marked confidential in Maryland and cannot be released. In other words, it takes a court order to unseal the documents. Here's the problem with that. It's easier to get an extreme risk protection order than it is to find out the reason for the order in the first place. Is that nuts, or is it just me? So these are some of the problems with these kinds of things. I look at what's going on with the president, and I realize he is pushed to meet with the whistleblower. Many people have pushed to get the identity of the whistleblower. They want to know what predicated this whistleblower's decision to come out with this information. They want to know who are the individuals who provided this whistleblower with the information, because essentially he stood up and said, some people told me. Well, okay, which people? And you're saying that they told you, but if you play the telephone game where I tell the person next to me something and that person tells them the next person, and you get back to me again if you've gone through 10 or 12 people, and it's what I'm being told now is completely unrecognizable. It's nowhere near what I told the person to begin with. It changed as it went through people. So even if you're among people who have good reputation and good intentions, the message gets screwed up as it goes from person to person to person. Why don't we hear these things from the people who say they witnessed them? Or maybe it's that they didn't witness them. Who knows? But you can't get the information. Not much different, is it, than a situation with Gary Willis, where you can't get the information that was on the order. You can't get the information from the police department as to why they did what they did. Now, maybe they'll be forthcoming in that. Maybe they have been, and I missed it in my research, and if that's the case, please let me know. But one way or the other, what I'm seeing happen to the President of the United States is very concerning, because the very same people who want to do this to the President are the same people that want to do this to you and I. I mean, what they'd like to do is have a friend of mine tell them that I'm dangerous, and they can come and get me, and they can take my stuff. And they can do it without due process. That is a violation of the United States Constitution, and it violates my rights in several different ways in several different places. Going back to Alan Gottlieb's discussion with AmmoLand, one of the things he said is, we're not sure how this drama will play out against President Trump, but we do know that any time an anonymous complaint can be used to launch something as serious as an impeachment inquiry by the same people who are pushing red flag laws against gun owners, it's time to seriously rethink both processes. If this can happen to a president, if this can happen to a United States president, how long will it be before a red flag case can be launched on the basis of an anonymous complaint? Step by step, Gottlieb said, it appears we're getting closer to the kind of government the Second Amendment was designed to protect us against. I think he's right. They're pushing this to the point where we're going to find ourselves in a totalitarian government that can just grab you and take you off to jail and take your stuff without any due process at all. We cannot allow these kinds of things to stand. We cannot allow this to be done to the President of the United States, whether you like him or not, and we certainly cannot allow these red flag laws to continue unabated in their current form. Now, I'll talk about some things we could do and maybe might be acceptable to gun owners in a minute. Among the other things we've done to help you help us to keep GunGuyTV going is we've created a GunGuyTV store on our website. Now, it's an Amazon affiliate store, so when you buy something there, you're really buying it from Amazon, but you're finding the product on our store and buying it from Amazon, and Amazon pays us a small marketing fee. We have all kinds of things up there, from reloading equipment to knives, optics, holsters, all kinds of stuff that are firearms and shooting related. There's even targets up there and a whole host of other things. And if you find a product or you're looking for a product you can't find, let us know. We'll add it for you so that you can purchase it there if you'd like. Now, if you don't want to do that, you want to buy something other than firearms, you can also go to our website at GunGuy.tv and click on the Amazon banner and then buy whatever you want. You can buy toilet paper, toothpaste, or some new clothes or towels for your kitchen or bathroom or whatever you want to buy, and Amazon will pay us a small marketing fee. It doesn't cost you anything. The price for you is the same. Your Amazon Prime shipping works the same. Everything for you is exactly the same. All that happens is they pay us a small marketing fee because you went to Amazon through our website. So I encourage you, if you'd like to help out GunGuyTV at no cost to you, check out the GunGuyTV store. You'll find it at GunGuy.tv, and you can just click on the store link.
Saving the Second Amendment, one episode at a time. This is the GunGuyTV podcast.
I mentioned that there are some things that gun owners would probably be okay with. For example, in California, we have a statute called 5150, and it's the Health and Welfare Code, or whatever they call it, for folks who obviously appear to be a danger to themselves or others because they may have some mental illness. So if you have a neighbor or a family member or whatever, and you call and mention that they're just a little bit off their rocker at the moment, they're having a tough time, and law enforcement comes and talks to them, and they determine that, yeah, this person's about a half bubble off plumb and we need to do something about it, then they can take them temporarily under the 5150 code, and they can take them down to county mental health, where a mental health professional can evaluate them to see if they are legitimately a danger to themselves or others, or whether they just need some help in some fashion or other. And they can hold them for up to 72 hours for observation. Now, that law has been around in California forever. I wouldn't be surprised if similar laws exist throughout the United States and states in every state of the union. Well, if you take someone for the 5150 statute and a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist says, yeah, this person is dangerous to themselves and others, now it makes sense at that point to begin perhaps a court proceeding where they can be evaluated further. They can hire an attorney to defend them. They can have due process. And if at the end of that due process it is determined that, yes, they are indeed dangerous, and then they need to have no firearms available to them, then that's a process. That's due process. That I don't think I have too much argument with that, provided we're going through some due process so this individual's rights are not stripped from them without any recourse at all. They need to be able to defend themselves, face the witnesses against them, face the charges against them, and deal with it in a court of law where it is a process that they go through where they have an ability to defend themselves and they know it's happening. That's not what happens with the red flag laws. What happens with the red flag laws is they come and bang on your door in the dark, either after dark when they know you're home or in the morning before you leave, before you wake up. They try to catch you unawares and they want to take your stuff. You don't even know that anybody's complained against you. Well, that's a recipe for disaster. You have no idea what's happening, and now these people who have guns and armor, I tell you what, they show up to these things tacked out. They don't. The cops don't show up to these things like they normally look. They show up to them with wearing level 4 body armor and plates and having rifles and all this other stuff because they're afraid of you. They're afraid you're going to shoot them with the firearms that you have. So they come all tacked out. They drive up in their black SUVs. They bang on your door. It looks like the SWAT team just showed up at your house. Now, it may not always happen that way, but the ones that I've seen video of, that's what they are. That's how they show up. Well, that would scare the tar out of anybody. Of course you're going to get a gun to defend yourself. You may not even know who these people are. They're showing up dressed like that in the dark, and you had no warning. Nobody told you that anybody filed a complaint against you. You're not going through any kind of a process. You don't even have a chance, really, to sort it out quickly enough to know that you should comply. No wonder this guy, Gary Willis, showed up to the door with a gun in his hand. I would have myself, if I had answered the door at all, which I may not have, in which case what? Does that mean they're going to get a battering ram and break down my door? They're liable to have me shooting at them because they're doing that. And what happens to the gun owner? What happens to the person who this order is against? They're going to get killed because the cops are going to kill them. That's what happened to that gentleman. He got killed. Why? Because there was no due process. His death was not just a tragedy. In my mind, it was a crime that the government committed against him by completely ignoring and violating his constitutional rights to due process. So if as a society, we want to have some sort of law that will allow law enforcement and the courts and the government to investigate someone who may appear to be or does appear to be a danger to themselves or others, then we, believe it or not, we have those laws already. We have them in California. They don't use them like they should, but they have them. And if a person is then evaluated and it's determined by professionals who deal with mental illness that this person might be mentally ill or may have some desire to harm others, then we'll go through a proceeding here and maybe their firearms are taken from them after due process. But we can't do what Trump wanted to do. We can't take the guns first, do the due process later. I'd be willing to bet you if somebody sat down in front of him and said, Mr. President, you remember what you wanted to do with gun owners? That's what's being done to you. How do you feel about it now? He wouldn't be all that thrilled about it. Because they are doing to him, with this whole impeachment process, precisely what they'd like to do to you. Precisely what they want to do to me. The heck with due process. Who cares about those constitutional rights? Let's confiscate it first. We'll deal with due process later. Well, Mr. President, Congress, law enforcement, courts, politicians et al., anti-gunners, progressives, left-wingers, whoever you want to list that feels that way, that's simply not the way it works in the United States of America. That is not the way the Constitution was written, and it is not the way our founders expected these things to go when they wrote it. And as God is my witness, I will stand to defend the United States Constitution until my last breath. Since you're listening, I urge you to do the same. We need to contact our representatives, and again, I say this all the time. I am not urging anyone to commit any violent acts. Let's please not do that. We're not there, and it isn't necessary. We have a system. We need to use it. Our president has a system, and he is using it, and he's winning. So we can get behind him. Maybe he can do a little bit more winning for us. I'm very proud of GOA, by the way. Pratt is very good about getting out there and saying exactly what he thinks. And that's why, among other things, I am a life member of the Gun Owners of America. You should be, too. Well, anyway, that's about it for this section of the podcast. We're going to wrap it up here. If you're part of Patreon, then stick with me. We're going to talk about the other stuff, which is how do we prepare for when the you-know-what hits the fan if we happen to live in the city. We'll talk about that then. Stick with me if you're on Patreon. If not, I'm going to wrap it up here. As I said, have a wonderful week. Thank you very much for all of your support and for listening. And please, be safe.
You've been listening to the GunGuy TV podcast.